notes. Okay, if not all of them, I will be able to send at least 3-4 of them, and you would be able to refer to them to do your homework and so on. And then homework 7 or homework 8, I don't remember which one it is now. I need to send that across, or homework 7, I think. So I think maybe today or tomorrow, once again, I will send the homework across. It will be due in 2 weeks time. But given that we have only maybe less than a month remaining for the course, I don't know if I can give the next homework 2 weeks from the submission date of the homework that I would be sending now. Because if I do that, see, 2 weeks from now, it's already 22nd. 2 weeks from now will take us to the first week of January, and I will be able to give only one more homework then. And I think that will place you at a disadvantage. Although doing homeworks looks like a chore, actually it prepares you very well for the next midterm and the final exam. Okay, because practicing these problems will help you solve similar problems easily in the exam. So I would like to give at least 2 homeworks after this one, after the one yeah, after the one that I would be sending soon, so that we would have altogether 8 or 9 homeworks. Okay, so what I would probably do is, I will send this homework, I will give you guys 2 weeks, but the next homework I will send 1 week from now and not 2 weeks from now. So is that okay? Do you guys have any comments about that? You will still get 2 weeks to submit the homework, but the homework will be administered 1 week after the present homework, the one that I would be sending soon, would be administered. So if you have issues with this, kindly speak out. If nobody says anything, I'll assume that it's okay. You will again get 2 weeks to solve that other homework. Okay. And then final homework will be towards the end of the course, and that is again intended to help you prepare for the midterm and the final. And whether that will be graded or not, I will think a little bit. I'll try to make sure that that can also be graded. Okay. So with these announcements, let us get started with today's lecture. I shall share
Sir,
the.
excuse me, sir.
Yes, yes,
Sir, actually the final exam timetable is also announced. And I
correct,
think dynamics is on 29th, last
correct,
day.
correct. So the second midterm, which covers the controls portion of the controls half of the course, will be on 14th of January. That is what we have already announced. So kindly mark your calendars. It will be Thursday, 14th of January. And the final exam, as Yogesh pointed out, is going to be on 29th, I think. So just go by the timetable that has been shared with you by the SCC, and we'll just go. We'll have the exam as per the timetable. Okay. So can you guys see my white sheet? Can someone unmute your mic and let me know if it is visible? Hello.
Yes, sir, it is visible.
Okay. Thank you. So let us get started. So the topic of today's lecture is controllability and observability. Okay, so let us briefly recap what we discussed in the previous lecture. So first we considered the situation where the number of sensors that we have for making measurements is not the same as the number of elements of the state vector. Okay, often it is the case that we can measure positions but not velocities, and some practical constraints might prevent us from inserting sensors at certain locations. So even some positions therefore might not be available to us. So in the face of this incomplete information about the state vector, uh, it appears as though we have hit a dead end or a roadblock as far as implementing all those wonderful schemes like feedback linearization and other things are concerned. So implementing those schemes becomes impossible without the availability of the state vector in real time. And to address this, we looked at the design of the state observer. Okay, so if positions are available, we don't want to directly differentiate those position signals to obtain velocities. We discussed that because the straightforward differentiation increases the noise, the effect of noise in the signal. So we therefore didn't want to do that. So without differentiating the velocity, differentiating the position signals, how do we still estimate the velocities? That was what was accomplished by the state observer. Of course, it's just possible that even some of the positions are not available while some velocities might be available. So in such a case, that original argument will break down, but nevertheless, one would require to take recourse to a state observer to estimate the full state vector. Okay, so we discussed how we designed the state observer. So we came up with a model of the system which is residing inside a computer, which is forced, or the same input that is applied to the actual physical system is also applied to this model. And this model is a copy of the original system plus some feedback term, which is proportional to the difference between the output of the actual physical system and the output of this copy. Okay, so then we saw that the error dynamics associated with this E dot, error dynamics obeyed this equation, A minus LC times E. Okay, now we could use the principles of pole placement to ensure that the eigenvalues of this new matrix A minus LC are situated wherever we want them to be situated. So the L matrix can be so chosen that the eigenvalues are placed wherever we desire them to be placed, and then we can estimate the states. Okay, once we have the states available to us, then we have the necessary tools to execute control design. We can implement our feedback linearization or pole placement based engineering of closed loop dynamics or whatever else that we wish to do. Okay, then we talked about how, as magical and as comprehensive our approach to control of a dynamic system has been so far, because we considered a very general model and we came up with a control strategy which could apparently take care of controlling this very general model of a dynamic system. Then we talked about the conditions under which this general model is actually not sufficiently general to encompass every possible physical situation. So one of them was the fact that we don't have observers for nonlinear systems. So while linear systems, in case of linear systems, we can synthesize observers in a transparent manner, and we can analyze also the behavior of these observers as we have done here. There is no such general approach available to a nonlinear system. So one has to do this on a case-by-case basis. Then, so we considered the case where you had pathologies in your system, and that's what we would be discussing today: controllability and observability of the system. So then I'll just write down here conditions under which feedback control. State estimation alone is not adequate. Okay, so under this umbrella comes the first one. I mean, we let us say we are unable to estimate the states. The second one, we have pathologies. Even if we estimate them, we cannot control them, and so on. Or perhaps we cannot even estimate them. And the third case is when you have uncertainty in the model of your system. So if you have a robot that is picking up something and placing that object somewhere else, that object that is being picked up and placed, its inertia might not be known precisely, or it may change so over such a wide range that we cannot really model it effectively. So therefore, so the equations that we used for computed torque technique will break down, because they are dependent on our knowledge of the mass matrix structure and its elements and so on, mass matrix and Coriolis terms and centrifugal terms and all such things. Okay, then finally we talked about how disturbances, forces that the dynamic system might experience, which is not in our control. So these are all conditions under which simple state estimation alone is not adequate. Okay, and we need to do better than what some of the techniques that we have discussed so far allow us to do. Okay, so those other issues which I outlined in the previous lecture form the basis for the remainder of the material in this course. How do you deal with disturbances? How do you deal with uncertainties in your plant model, and so on and so forth. But today we will just consider this one issue of controllability and observability. And to get started on this discussion, I took a toy example of two pendulums which are completely unconnected with one another, but the state space framework allows us to combine their dynamics in a seamless manner. That's both an advantage as well as a disadvantage. Many times analyses get simplified as a consequence of our ability to merge the dynamics of two seemingly unconnected systems, whereas on other occasions this lands us in trouble. And that was what happened when we combined the dynamics of two pendulums. One of them actuated, so theta 1, this is actuated by a torque. The other one is not actuated, but we are measuring the angle theta 2. So although the framework allowed us to combine the dynamics, we knew as engineers that it is not possible for me to control theta 2 by doing anything I wish to do to the torque tau. Okay, so the controllability problem exists in this case. I cannot place all the poles of the dynamic system wherever I want them to be placed. I can place the poles only for this part of the system, assuming I have theta 1 available to me. Okay, but then if you are measuring theta 2 alone, then we notice that theta 2 has nothing to do with theta 1. So by measuring theta 2, I cannot estimate theta 1 or the state vector which comprises theta 1, theta 2 and their derivatives with respect to time cannot be all estimated by just measuring theta 2. I may be able to estimate theta 2 dot, but not theta 1 or theta 1 dot. Okay, so this revealed the problems with this framework of often presenting us with systems that look very similar to other systems that we are used to and we are comfortable controlling, but actually have some of these maladies, namely that some of them cannot be controlled and some of them cannot be completely measured. Okay, so we already started our discussion on controllability and observability. So added to this uncomfortable state of affairs is the fact that the state space representation of the dynamics of a system is not unique. Okay, so for example, we wrote down the state space representation of a linear system as something like this: x dot is equal to ax plus bu and y is equal to cx. Now, are the states x unique? Well, the direction from which we came may give us the illusion, may give us the feeling that x is unique. What was x in all the problems that we considered? It was comprised of two column vectors, okay, stacked one above another. One was the vector of joint positions, right, or the generalized degrees of freedom, generalized coordinates. And the second one was a vector of generalized velocities. This was a state vector that we have been using all the time. But this need not be the state vector. Okay, to engineers, this makes perfect sense because we obtain the state vector starting from Lagrange's formalism and so on and so forth. But let us say a mathematician was to see this problem. Okay, a mathematician looks at this equation and will undertake this transformation. X1 is equal to t times x, where t is a n by n matrix and a non-singular matrix with constant entries, let us say. Okay, let us say there's nothing preventing this mathematician from undertaking this transformation. What does that mean practically? So let us consider just the first element. Okay, let us say the T matrix is something like T11, T12, T1n, T21, etc., etc., and this is x, x1, x2 up to xn. Okay, T times x is this. Okay, so what I'm doing then is I'm creating a new variable x1, which is a linear combination of the elements of the original state vector. T11 x1 plus T12 x2, etc., etc., plus T1n xn. Okay, now you might wonder, what sense does this make? In our understanding, x1 represented the first generalized coordinate. It could be the joint angle of a serial manipulator. X2 represented again the second joint angle, and some of these vectors represented joint velocities. Now I'm coming along and I'm combining all these physical quantities which are not even dimensionally consistent, right? Of course, I can choose these constants T1, etc., such that dimensional consistency is achieved. But what physical sense does it make? Why should I combine joint angle with joint velocity to form a new vector, to form a new entry in this state vector? It makes no sense physically. But the mathematician isn't worried about physical sense. This is something that is permitted by mathematics. Okay, so he or she is therefore here. They have the license to go ahead and undertake this transformation. So let us see what happens in that case. So if x1 is equal to t times x, then x1 dot is equal to t times x dot. Okay, or in other words, let us say t is invertible and so on. We would have, if I were to replace x dot here, with x1 dot, I would have t inverse of x1 dot, which is x dot, is equal to a times x, and I can write x in terms of x1. So t inverse of x1, okay, plus b times u. Okay, let me do it slightly differently, or okay, let it be this way. We'll figure this out sometime later. Okay, so then, and y is equal to c times x1, which is t times x. Sorry, t inverse of x1. C times x, which is t inverse of x1. So therefore, I would have x1 dot to be equal to t times a times t inverse of x1 plus t times b of u. Okay, and y is equal to c times t inverse of x1. So you see that these matrices are no longer the same as the previous ones, a, b, and c. Okay, so this is therefore going to be equal to some new a1 x1 plus b1 u, and this is going to be equal to some new matrix c1 times x1. Okay, so there is this other confusion also, which is brought about because I can undertake these coordinate transformations, and therefore that original system representation sort of loses its identity, right? So there are, of course, a1 and a are related by means of the similarity transformation, but nevertheless, it remains a fact that a1 can look unrecognizably different from a, as would b1 and c1. Okay, so the representation of a dynamic system in this state space form is not unique. Okay, so what problems would this cause for us? So let us say you have your rival, who is your rival is in a team which is supposed to model the physical system, and you are supposed to control it. I'm just giving a hypothetical funny example. Okay, so he or she doesn't like you. Okay, so they model the system and they intentionally garble the information by undertaking this transformation. Okay, x1 is equal to t times x, and then give you this new dynamic system which doesn't at all look like the previous one. The previous one, which they developed when they were modeling, had this very neat understanding, very neat clear picture. The x vector comprised the joint positions and joint velocities, etc., etc. Now that information is gone because this transformation has been undertaken. Okay, so now a1, b1, etc. look very different from a and b. So if the pendulum problem were cast exactly the way we did in the previous class, then even all of us could see that the first subsystem could not be, the state vector could not be estimated, theta1 and theta1 dot elements could not be estimated, and the second system could not be controlled. As engineers, it was clear to us, okay, because we knew the physical system we were dealing with, and we knew that there were problems with either control or observing of this physical system. But let us say this rival of yours garbles this information and creates these two state vectors which are linear combinations of theta1 and theta2, or theta1 and theta2 dot, and so on and so forth, and then obtains the overall dynamics of this unconnected system and then gives it to you. How on earth will you be able to tell by looking at those new matrices A, B, and so on that it's actually not controllable and observable? Okay, so there are these problems associated with this representation. That doesn't mean that this representation is bad. It's just that it has its advantages, which we have exploited so far. in our design of observers and so on and so forth, and it has its drawbacks as well, as would any other technique that we would adopt would. Okay, so therefore, to safeguard ourselves from all these possible pitfalls in our understanding of whether we can control a physical system and observe a physical system, or in other words, reconstruct its states or not, it is good to have foolproof tests, okay, which tell us incontrovertibly, which don't rely on our intuition, okay, which don't rely on our understanding of the physics of the problem. It's just if I'm given a matrix A, B, and C, and a system cast in this particular form, can I, take a call on whether the system is controllable or observable or not? And if it is controllable, despite the machinations of my enemy in the other team, can I separate out that observable part and the controllable part from the unobservable part and the uncontrollable part? So this is the topic for today's lecture. Okay, any questions so far? Okay, so let us continue. Let us take up this issue of controllability first. We know that the response of the system to a certain input and a certain set of initial conditions is given by e to the power at x naught plus integral 0 to t e to the power a t minus tau b u of tau d tau. Now, what does it mean when we say that we can control the system? Okay, of course, feedback control is one kind of control, but more generally, what does it mean when we say we have full control over this, this system? Do you agree with me that what we are essentially saying is that we can always choose a certain u of tau, that we can get the state x of t to be whatever we want it to be. Okay, so at a particular point in time t, I have complete control over the entries of x of t. So if I choose x of t to be any particular vector, I can always find a corresponding u of t or u of tau that leads the states to assume that particular pre-designed value at that instant t. Do you agree with me that this is a non-controversial interpretation of controllability? So we have complete control over the entries of the state vector x of t. Of course, what we can actually control is u, but what we are saying is that I can always choose u in such a way that I can get x to assume whatever values it wants at any time t. Okay, so this is something that we can all agree upon as a qualitative criterion to brand the system as a controllable system. Okay, so what that also then means, since x naught is the vector of initial the initial value vector, initial condition, so x of t minus e to the power at x naught, I'll just write it this way, is equal to 0 to t e to the power at minus tau b u of tau d tau. So if the system is controllable, whatever is on the left hand side can be chosen to be any vector I want, and I can always find the input u of tau. Input, I could have multiple inputs or a single input depending on the system that we are dealing with, but I can always find this input vector as function of time, such that when I apply u from 0 to t in this particular form, I will end up with the state vector being this particular value. Okay, so that is the that is when I would call the system to be observable, controllable. Now, what is it that prevents me from doing this? Let us take a look at that. Okay, so why is it that we end up with pathologies? So we already saw, for example, the case of this two unconnected pendulums, that such a situation is possible. No matter what u of t I pick, what torque I apply for the first pendulum, I can do nothing about the states of the velocity or the position of the second pendulum. Okay, so how do we capture this fact for a more general case where we have no idea about the physical appearance of the system that we are dealing with. Okay, that's what we are trying to. Just by looking at the structure of the matrices A and B, can we tell whether the system is controllable or not? Okay, so to make this assessment, we need to first take a small detour. Okay, there's a theorem in linear algebra that we need to invoke for us to come up with this litmus test to tell whether the system is controllable or not. Okay, and this theorem is called as a Cayley-Hamilton theorem. Okay, so you might have come across this in some linear algebra course that you might be taking, but nevertheless, I don't want to assume that you are aware of this theorem. I shall state it and then use it later on going forward. Okay, what does Cayley-Hamilton theorem state? It's a beautifully succinct result. Okay, it just states that every matrix, every square matrix A satisfies its own characteristic equation. That's it. This is Cayley-Hamilton's theorem. Of course, the details are all packaged away because what does characteristic equation mean? So if I take determinant of lambda I minus A equal to 0, so this is the characteristic equation. Okay, and this is a polynomial in lambda on the left hand side, and that's equal to 0. So lambda power n plus a1 times lambda power n minus 1, etc., etc., plus an is equal to 0. So this is the characteristic equation. The roots of the characteristic equation are, of course, the eigenvalues of the matrix A. Okay, what this theorem states is that this is, of course, a scalar result. Okay, on the right hand side I have a scalar 0. On the left hand side also I have scalar quantities. But suppose I were to replace an with an times the identity matrix of the same dimension as the capital A matrix. Okay, and lambda power n with capital A power n, and a1 times lambda power n minus 1 with capital A power n minus 1. These are all what? These are all n by n matrices, right? So we are going from a a scalar equation to a matrix equation. Okay, I do this, then what the theorem states is that this particular sum of matrices, the sum of powers of A is also going to be equal to 0. But what 0 is this? It's not the same as 1 by 1 0. It's a n by n 0. It's a matrix of zeros. Okay, so this is Cayley-Hamilton theorem. I don't want to prove it. You can prove it once again by diagonalizing the matrix A. That's one straightforward case. If the A can be diagonalized, if its eigenvalues are distinct, it's possible for you to show this in one step, although I wouldn't do it here. If it is not diagonalizable too, this theorem is valid, but the proof is more complicated. But we will use this result in our in development of this test for controllability. Okay, we have within this integral on the right hand side, we have this term e to the power a t minus tau, a times t minus tau, and then there is this term b u of tau d tau. Okay, and what is e to the power t minus tau? We defined it to be identity matrix plus a times t minus tau divided by 1 factorial plus a square times t minus tau the square by 2 factorial, etc., etc. This was the definition of e to the power at times b u of tau d tau. Okay, now how far does this summation, this series go? It goes to infinity. I'll have a power a cube, a to the power 4, etc. Ultimately, I will get to a to the power n, and then a to the power n plus 1, etc., etc. So all the powers of a from 0 to infinity are represented in this series. Okay, but are they all independent quantities, or can we use Cayley-Hamilton theorem to write these higher powers of A in terms of its lower powers? So you notice right away from Cayley-Hamilton theorem that A power n is equal to minus of an, capital A power n minus 1 minus, sorry, a1, not an, minus a a2, capital A power n minus 2, etc., minus an I. Okay, that's already visible from this result here. Okay, what does that mean? It means that A, at least the nth power of A, is not an independent quantity. I can just get it by computing the previous n minus 1 powers of A and adding that with this identity matrix in this particular manner. Okay, so A power n is therefore a linear combination of the lower powers of A. Okay, that we get directly from Cayley-Hamilton theorem. What about if A power n is a linear combination of lower powers of A? What about A power n plus 1? We notice that if I were to multiply the Cayley-Hamilton result, completely by A, what would I get? A times A to the power n is A to the power n plus 1 plus A1 times A to the power n, etc., plus an times capital A is equal to again 0. This is the same Cayley-Hamilton result, but with A multiplied on the left hand side and the right hand side. So what do I get then? A power n plus 1 then is equal to minus of a1 A power n minus a2 A power n minus 1, etc., minus an capital A. So well, what we see therefore is that the n plus 1th power of A is a linear combination of the previous n powers of A. Okay, A power n, A power n minus 1, etc., all the way to A power 1. But then A power n again, you see, is dependent on A power n minus 1, A power n minus 2, etc., all the way to I. So therefore, A power n plus 1, in this expression for A power n plus 1, I can replace A power n with this term on the right hand side. And what I therefore discover is that A power n plus 1 also is just a linear combination of all the powers of A up to n minus 1, starting from the identity matrix. Any questions about this? This is an important part of the argument. So if you have any questions about this, please voice it. Okay, so now I can extend this argument, by I can go one step at a time and show that any higher power of A power k, I'll write it elsewhere, A power k for k greater than or equal to n can always be written as a linear combination of A power n minus 1. So alpha 1 A power n minus 1, alpha 2 A power n minus 2, etc., all the way up to identity matrix, every higher power of A. So what this then tells me is that this expression e power A t minus tau can actually be written only in terms of the powers of A up to A power n minus 1. Even though it appears to have powers of A beyond n plus 1, n plus 2, all the way to infinity, every single one of those higher powers of A can always be decomposed into their constituent components or can be represented in terms of I, A square, all the way to A power n minus 1. And therefore, I would have e power A t minus tau to be some function f1 of t minus tau times the identity matrix plus f2 of t minus tau times the matrix A, etc., all the way to fn of t minus tau. These are all scalar functions of time times A power n minus 1. Any questions about this? What the exact form of f1, f2, fn are, it may depend on the matrix A, but suffice it to know that all the the entire expression on the left hand side can be written in terms of I, A square, all the way to A power n minus 1, and no higher powers of A are necessary to represent e to the power A times this scalar quantity. Any questions about this? Okay. So what do we get then? Let me then insert this into that equation. X of t minus e to the power at x naught is equal to integral 0 to t f1 of t minus tau times I plus f2 of t minus tau times a, etc., times b u of tau d tau. Okay, so I, a square are all constant matrices. So I will rewrite this as I times integral 0 to t f1 of t minus tau u of tau d tau plus a times integral 0 to t f2 of t minus tau u of tau plus etc., plus a power n minus 1 times fn of t minus tau u of tau d tau. Okay, sorry, I can take b out. Sorry, this is not I, this is b. This is a times b, and is a minus n times b. Any questions about this step here? It's just plain algebra. Okay. Next, I make one more simplification and I'm done. Okay. This, looks like a product of a certain set of matrices with a set of scalars. Okay. I will write this slightly differently. I will write this as I will concatenate all these matrices B, A, B, not concatenate, I'll juxtapose. Okay. And then A square B, A power n minus 1 B. This is a matrix. Okay. And this multiplies a long column vector. Okay. So if U is a vector, this will be U1, this will be U2, and so on and so forth. So integral 0 to t f1 t minus tau u of tau. I'm doing this for the case where B is a vector, okay, not a matrix. But the arguments are identical when B is a matrix and not a vector. Okay, all the way to integral 0 to t fn of t minus tau u of tau d tau. Okay, so this is x of t minus e to the power at x naught. Okay, now let me give a special name for the left hand side. we know that if a system is controllable, I should be able to achieve whatever state I want on the left hand side, right? So let me call that x wish or something like that, WISH. This is what I wish the state to be at this time t. And what I can control, however, are the elements of this vector. Okay, so this is this matrix. I shall give a name for this matrix. It's called as a controllability matrix, gamma c. Okay, times this vector. It's always a vector, I think. I'm not sure if it's always a vector. Yeah, I think it will always be a vector. Okay, so this will be a function of time. Okay, so what are the dimensions of these vectors? Let us just before we go forward, let us just take note of the dimensions. This is a state vector, right? So it will be n by 1 column vector. Okay, now B B is a n by m matrix in general, and if you have only one input, then m will be equal to 1 and B will then be a n by 1 column vector. And I have how many entries here? I have n entries. Okay, so the size of gamma c will therefore be equal to n by n times m. Okay, so it is not in general a square matrix. You need to remember that. Okay, if m is equal to 1, if I have only one input to my dynamic system, then this will be a square matrix, but not otherwise. Okay, so what is the size of this term here? It's nm by 1. Okay, so this is not a n by 1 vector. This is not a n by n square matrix, but what I have on the right hand side is a product of the two, which is going to be a n by 1 state vector. Okay, now we can think of this gamma c in terms of its ability to transform vectors. Okay, when we were discussing dynamics, especially in the connection of the cross product matrix, the angular velocity matrix, and so on and so forth, we visited this notion of a matrix as a vector transformer. And here is one other example where this matrix is acting as a vector transformer. It is transforming this nm by 1 column vector into a n by 1 column vector. Okay, and the matrix necessary for that, of course, cannot be a square matrix. It has to, unlike in the previous discussion during the dynamics part, where we had a 3 by 3 matrix for doing this transformation. This, however, cannot be a square matrix, but nevertheless, the function that it plays is the same. It transforms this vector into that vector. Okay, it operates on this vector, so this is called as a domain. It is called as a range. Okay, it operates range. There is a domain of gamma c. It is a range of gamma c. Okay, now the question is, can I get any vector x that I want to? Under what conditions will I get? Can I always, does there always exist an f of t which will give me a vector, a desired vector x wish? Under what condition will that happen? Now this goes back to some concepts in linear algebra which I don't want to bring up now because it will be a major digression. But suffice it to know, and if you wish to, you could consult some books in linear algebra. It's possible to transform. There always exists a vector f that gives me the desired vector, provided the rank of this matrix gamma c is equal to n. If the rank of gamma c, what do we mean by rank? So rank, so this matrix here, how many columns does it have? It has nm number of columns, right? So what does rank represent? Rank represents the number of linearly independent columns that you have in a particular matrix. Okay, you cannot have, if m is greater than n, if m is greater than 1, which is always going to be the case, the rank of this matrix cannot be greater than the smaller of these two numbers, n and nm. In this case, it will be n. The rank cannot be greater than n. The rank can be smaller than n if you wish to, if that is permitted, but rank can never be greater than n. Okay, so if the rank of gamma c, which can at most be n, is not actually n but is less than n, then you can show that your system is not controllable. I mean, why would you say that your system is not controllable? It is because it is not possible for us to achieve or for us to choose a particular function f of t such that we will get whatever x we wish. There will be certain state vectors x wish that will be out of bounds for me if gamma c doesn't have a rank exactly equal to n. Okay, so here then is the litmus test that I was looking for to judge whether my system is going to be controllable or not. Okay, the necessary and sufficient condition for my system to be controllable is that the rank of our controllability matrix be equal to n. Okay, this is called as a controllability matrix.
Sir, hello.
Yes, yes.
Good morning, sir. Sir, that f vector, no? That f is going from f1 to fn. So that how that nm cross 1 you have written, no?
Yeah, right. That's why I pointed out that I have done this analysis for the case of a for the case of a scalar input u. Okay, in which case m will be equal to 1, and this will be a n by n matrix, and this will be a n by 1 vector. Okay, otherwise I will have to do a little bit more jugglery here. I will have u1 of t, and I will also have u2 of t. So I will have integral 0 to f1 times u1, f1 times u2, etc., etc. Okay, I have not done that here. It will be in the notes. Okay, the more general case where B is not just a vector, but B is a matrix, a n by m matrix, that is in the notes. Okay, so this is in general a nm by 1 vector, nm by 1 vector, but I have while developing this for the sake of simplicity, I have considered the case where u is a scalar. Okay.
Yes, sir. Okay.
Okay. So gamma C is a very important matrix. It's called as a controllability matrix. Okay. So for a system to be controllable, the rank of this matrix should be equal to n. Okay. So if we were to apply this test to the pendulum system that we considered, the two unconnected pendulums, I don't want to do it here. Perhaps I will give it to you as a homework problem. You will see that its rank is not equal to n. Okay, and that is why you have one particular part of the system being uncontrollable. Okay, so that naturally brings us to this topic of how to separate those states that are controllable from those states that are not controllable. Okay, so once we have discovered that we have a diseased system on our hands, that it is not fully controllable, how do we separate out the system into states that are controllable and states that are not controllable? Okay, so this is the topic that we will take up next. So what I shall do in this case is I shall provide a recipe for separating the states into controllable states and uncontrollable states. Okay, I will not provide the proof, but I will share with you my notes, my lecture notes, because the proof is simply algebra. Okay, it's plain simple linear algebra, and some of you may be familiar with it, some of you may not be familiar with it. Hence, I don't want to provide the proof here, and I will not be invoking the proof in any of your assignments or any such thing. So I shall just provide this the way I provided the Lagrange formalism in the form of a recipe. I shall now provide the way to separate out the uncontrollable and the controlled states in the form of a recipe. Okay, but this recipe is better than the previous one because the proof for this recipe is going to be in the lecture notes. Any questions? Okay. So I have my controllability matrix. Okay, let us say its rank is actually less than n. Okay, then let us say its rank is k, less than n. Rank of gamma C is k, which is less than n. Then what that implies, which I hope you have learned in some linear algebra course that you have taken, is that there are k linearly independent vectors that comprise this matrix gamma C. All other vectors, the remaining nm minus k vectors, are linear combinations of just these k vectors. Okay, so what I do then is I take those k vectors, okay, and make a new matrix TC, which is comprised of those k vectors. Okay, I'll call that TC1. So this is juxtaposition of the k linearly independent vectors of gamma C. Okay, so what will the dimension of TC be? The number of rows will be n, but the number of columns will be k. So it will be n by k vector, n by k matrix. Okay, and then I will pad up this matrix with another set of vectors. Since I have, I want to make a n by n matrix out of this, I will always have some n minus k other column vectors which are linearly independent from TC1, okay, which are not part of gamma c, which had nothing to do with gamma c. It is just a fact of mathematics that if I have a, I can have n if the dimension of my vector is n, or the number of entries in my column vector is n, I'll have n such linearly independent vectors. Okay, so I have now picked only k of them. Now I shall take the other n minus k, which are nothing to do with the problem, but just allows me to build a non-singular matrix TC out of them. Okay, so this matrix TC2 is a n by n minus k matrix, okay, whose columns are linearly independent from the columns of TC1. That's it. That's all. That's how I pick the columns of TC2. There could be any vectors, no rhyme or rhythm. Just pick those that are linearly independent from the columns of TC1. Any questions about how this TC matrix is formulated? Okay. Now, it turns out that if I execute this transformation, that x is equal to TC times x1, then what will the state equation look like? I had x dot is equal to AX plus BU. Okay. Now x on the other hand is TC times x1, right? So it is TC times x1 dot will be equal to A times TC times x1 plus BU. Or in other words, x1 dot will be equal to TC inverse A times TC times x1 plus TC inverse BU. Now it turns out that if this TC is chosen in the manner that we have done here, then the structure of this matrix and that vector will look like this. Okay, I'll just write it here. I can divide up my state vector x1 into two constituents, x11 and x12. Each of them has a dimension, of course, less than n. Okay, x11 dot, x12 dot will be equal to a particular matrix A11, another matrix A12. The third entry here is 0. The fourth entry is A22 times x11, x12. So this is the separation that I was talking about. How do I separate out the states that are controllable from the states that are not controllable? And why is that going to happen? I'll just show you in a minute. This B11, 0, U. Okay. So if I were to apply this coordinate transformation or this coordinate change, okay, if I come up with a new transformation, a new set of states x1, which are related to the older set of states by means of this matrix TC, and the way we have chosen TC is such that it's always going to be non-singular. Okay, then if I undertake this, then this is going to be the new structure for the state equation of the system. Okay, why will this be 0? Why will that be 0? Why do we have this particular structure? That's in the notes. Okay, it follows from linear algebra. So now let us just expand out these things. x11 dot is equal to A11 x1 plus A12 x2, x12 plus B11 u. Okay, x12 dot is equal to A22 x2, x12 plus nothing times u. Now, do you see that the second subsystem is uncontrollable? It's obvious, right? Because the second subsystem doesn't have u appearing here, either directly or indirectly. Okay, if x1 figured x1, sorry, this x11. If x11 figured here, then I will not be able to make the same statement, because even though u might not be appearing, x11 is itself affected by u. So there is a possibility for me to affect x12 also through x11. But even that is not possible here. You see that x12 is a completely autonomous system. x12 dot is equal to A22 times X12. It's not dependent on any extraneous input, whether it could be X11 or U. Okay, so this is the uncontrollable part. Okay, and this is the controllable part. So if your enemy on the other team packages the system nicely and gives you in an unrecognizable form, then you can first obtain the controllability matrix for that system that has been given to you, and we obtain the rank of that matrix. If that rank is less than n, then you make a new matrix, transformation matrix TC, where you take those k linearly independent vectors that comprise gamma C, and then pack that up with other n minus k vectors which are linearly independent from these other vectors to form a n by n non-singular matrix TC. And then you undertake the coordinate transformation x is equal to TC times x1. If you do that, then in the new coordinate system or in the new state vector, the new state vector x1 has this particular dynamics. And when I expand out this matrix TC inverse A times TC, I will see that it will have this particular form, and TC inverse B will have that particular form. And when I expand that out, I see that I have now separated out those states x1, 2, which are not affected by U at all. Okay, so this is the way you go about removing that diseased part of the system from the part that is that can be controlled. Okay, any questions about this? Okay, so the second part, Abhishek Panchal has a question.
Sir, this TC matrix is made up of TC1 and TC2, and with the final structure we got like A1, A12 and 0, A22. So there should be a relation between A22 and TC2. Means we are not seeing TC2 anywhere in the final expression. So can we get that somewhere in this?
We can. In fact, if you it turns out that I don't want to go into the steps, but A22 will be dependent on TC2 also. Okay, so I have it in the notes. So you kindly look up the notes, and I have the expression here with me. But to discuss that expression, I have to take the inverse of TC and give some new names for those subsystems and so on. That will be a digression. Okay, but A2 will depend on TC2 also. You are right in that, in your guess.
Okay, sir. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, Subhadeep Sahu has a question.
Hello, sir. Sir, can you tell that how the TC2 is put there? Means I could not follow where the TC2 is.
So TC2 are just some vectors that are linearly independent from TC1. Okay, so let me take an example so that you understand the arbitrariness associated with choosing TC2. Let us say gamma C has a rank 1. Okay, rank of gamma C is 1. Okay, it has only one linearly independent vector, and let us say that vector happened to be this particular one, 1, 0, 0. Just out of just for the sake of illustration, I'm taking this as that linearly independent vector of this matrix gamma C. Okay, so we are talking of a third order system, and in that third order system, this is the only linearly independent vector of that matrix gamma C. Now this is therefore going to be TC1. Now to make this a 3 by 3 non-singular matrix TC, I have to pad it up with TC2, whose entries are linearly independent from this one. So what are the possible choices that I have for TC2? I can choose TC2 to be 0, 1, 0, which is linearly independent from this, and 0, 0, 1. That's one way to choose it. But I don't need to stick with this. I can choose this to be 1, 0, 0. This is the first one, TC1. I can also choose this to be 1, 1, 0, which is also linearly independent from 1, 0, 0. And I can choose the other one to be 2, 3, 0. Okay, which is also linearly independent from all these two. So you see that there is really no rhyme or rhythm. I could change this 3 to 4, this 2 to 6, whatever number I want, doesn't matter. Okay, so this is how I compose my TC matrix. Okay.
Sir, is it required that TC2 will belong from gamma C?
Not at all. If you see none of these entries, I have not even talked about the structure of gamma C here. I have just, the only information I have used about gamma C is that 100 is the only linearly independent vector of gamma C. That's it. So the other two have no connection with gamma C.
So that means TC2 can be arbitrarily chosen, right? You have
Yes,
just
arbitrarily chosen. Arbitrarily chosen. Yes.
okay.
Okay. Yeah. So the next part is the question of observability. So just as I developed a test to confirm that my system is controllable, I now want to develop a test to confirm that I can reconstruct the states of my system. Okay, and that is the problem of observability. We had this very elegant, framework of observers, which allowed us to estimate the states x cap, which, as we discovered, could be made to converge to the states x at whatever rates we chose. We could place the poles of the error dynamics in such a way that very quickly x cap will converge to x, and therefore we can directly use the state estimates x cap in place of x for executing our feedback control law. Okay, but all of that is contingent on the fact that our observer works. I can estimate the states x cap from the measurements y. Okay, so what is the system again? X dot is equal to ax plus bu, y is equal to c times x. Okay, I know for a fact that well, just a moment. I had two different ways to demonstrate observability. Okay, let me do it this way. Okay, so I had two different ways. I was wondering which one of the two I should adopt. So I have decided. So let us say let us for to start with assume that we are dealing with a scalar output. I'm having only one output from my measurement system. For example, if it's a pendulum, I'm measuring the angle. I'm not measuring the velocity. Although the state vector will have both angle and velocity in it. So this is a 1 by 1 vector. It's a scalar. And x is a n by 1 vector. Okay. So C therefore is a 1 by n vector. Okay. So I want to estimate x, which has n separate entries in it, but I have only one measurement here, only one scalar at a particular point in time t. Okay, so this problem is mathematically intractable. How can I extract n numbers out of just one measurement? Okay, I don't have enough. I have too many equations. Okay, so what do? I differentiate this equation y dot of t. If I'm measuring y of t, I can estimate y dot of t by differentiating y of t. Of course, in practice, we don't want to differentiate because we'll amplify noise. But for the sake of theoretical analysis and for the sake of understanding the kind of constraints imposed by the structure of C and A, this is perfectly acceptable. Okay, if I have this measurement y of t, if I differentiate it, I get another independent measurement y dot of t. Okay, and what is that be equal to? C times x dot. Okay. Now it's going to be equal to C times A times excuse me, ax plus pu. Okay, but this term pu is in my hands, right? I know the matrix B. I know I am the one who is applying that input u. So I know what that vector u also is. Therefore, bu is known to me. So what I shall do for the sake of discussion of observability is to, since these are known to me, I shall remove them from my expression and by setting u equal to 0. Okay, I can argue this differently also, but for the moment I shall simply set u equal to 0 because it is not central to our discussion of observability. So whether I have an input or not, I will have trouble reconstructing the states if my system is not observable. So that observability, so if I have, let us say, a set of initial conditions and I release my system from those initial conditions, I should still be able to use my state estimator to estimate the states, even though there may be no forcing. So therefore, you understand that the input u does not play any role in judging whether my system is observable or not. So for the sake of avoiding complexity in our discussions, I shall set u to be equal to 0 so that this term will not appear anymore in our equations. Any questions about this? Okay, so y dot therefore is going to be equal to c times a times x of t. Okay, similarly y double dot of t will be equal to c times a square times x of t, and so on and so forth. So we get to the n minus 1th derivative of y, and that's going to be equal to c times a power n minus 1 times x of t. Okay, so I have made n independent, I have made one measurement y of t, but I'll be continuously acquiring y of t, so I can use this y of t, and in the neighborhood of t, I can take the, how I can see how y is changing, and then from that estimate the higher derivatives of that output. Okay, y dot, y double dot, I can simply differentiate the signal. That's what I'm doing here. Okay. Now I have n independent measurements which I have gotten out of just that one measurement. Okay, by differentiating it again and again. So now I make this vector y dot, y double dot, all the way to yn minus 1 of t, etc. is going to be equal to what? It's going to be equal to c times x, c times a times x, etc. c a power n minus 1 times x. Okay, what about the nth derivative? Is it linearly independent of the other derivatives? What is y, nth derivative of y? You see that is c a power n times x. And thanks to Cayley-Hamilton theorem, a power n is a linear combination of a power n minus 1 and so on and so forth. So y, the nth derivative of y, will therefore also be a linear combination of the other lower derivatives of y. Okay, so this is not an independent measurement. It's dependent. If I have y dot all the way to y n minus 1, y n and all other higher derivatives of y are simply linear combinations of the first n, the up to the n minus 1th derivative, thanks to Cayley-Hamilton theorem. Any questions about this? Okay.
Sir?
Yes.
Sir, then y power n minus 1 also it be dependent on others, no? Because only y1 only independent, no, sir?
No. Y and y dot are not necessarily.
Because this also we can by the help of the Cayley-Hamilton theorem we can express, no, sir?
No. You cannot express a to the power n minus 1 in terms of a to the power n minus 2 and so on and so forth. Okay, you cannot express a to the power n minus 1 as a linear combination of lower powers of a. It's only the nth power of a which can be represented as a linear combination of the lower powers of a. Okay, only after n and higher alone can you express the matrix a power k in terms of lower in terms of a power 0, a power 1 all the way to a power n minus 1, not otherwise. Okay. All right. So yeah. So I have this is a n by 1 vector. Okay, if I was making only a scalar measurement, and on the right hand side I would have c times, I will take x out here, c a power n minus 1 times x of t. Okay, so if you are making a scalar measurement, in principle, I can get the state vector x by inverting this matrix C, Ca up to Ca power n minus 1, which has been arranged in this particular manner. So what is for a scalar problem? For a scalar measurement, what is the size of this? What is the size of the vector x? It's n by 1. The each measurement is a scalar measurement. So therefore this will be, C will therefore be a 1 by n vector. Ca will also be a 1 by n vector, and so on and so forth. When I stack them one above another or one below another, I'll get a n by n matrix. This is for the scalar case. Okay. If on the other hand I have k measurements, okay, then x is a n by 1 vector, and this matrix here will be a nk by n matrix, and what I will have here will therefore be nk by 1 vector. Okay, vector of y and its higher derivatives. Okay, now this matrix is called as the observability matrix gamma O, gamma subscript O. Okay, so once again let us look at this matrix from the point of view of its ability to transform vectors. Okay, so this vector y dot etc y n minus 1 is equal to gamma O times x. Okay, for me, so this again a mapping, right? I want to extract x this time. I have made these measurements and I want to extract x. When will that be possible? That will be possible only when, again, from linear algebra, the rank of gamma O is equal to n. Okay, once again, the rank of gamma O can be at most equal to n. It cannot be greater than n, because nk is always greater than or equal to n. So this is at most, the rank of this at most equal to n. So the rank of gamma O should be the maximum value that is permitted to take, namely n. And in such a case, it is possible for me to invert this matrix and then extract x of t from the measurements and their higher derivatives. Okay, so although we don't do this in practice, we use the observer to estimate x of t. From a mathematical perspective, this reveals a fundamental problem associated with that observer design. If gamma O cannot be inverted, if gamma O's rank is less than n, then it is not possible for me to extract the full state vector x of t from the measurement y. Okay, so the observer structure may look radically different from what I have here, but this fact remains still a limiting fact as far as design of the observer also is concerned. Okay, so this gamma O is called as the observability matrix. So this is what helps me tell whether some of the states are observable or not. So in the case of our two pendulums, if I were to run that state vector, the matrices A and C through this machinery, I compute this matrix gamma O, C, Ca, etc., Ca power n minus 1. Then I will discover that the rank of that particular matrix is not equal to 4. Okay, because there I was having my state vector size was 4. Okay, so I would end up therefore concluding that my system was not observable completely. There were some states that cannot be observed. In particular, theta 1 and theta 1 dot were two of the elements of the state vector that could not be observed by simply measuring theta 2 in the pendulum problem. Okay, so I would come to the same conclusion by mechanically computing this particular matrix and checking for its rank. Okay, so this leads us to the last part. If I have such a system whose controllability matrix, observability matrix has a rank less than n, how do I separate out the observable states from the unobservable states? Okay, the procedure is not very different from the one that we adopted earlier. So what we do is, any questions?
Yes, sir. Hello, sir. Sir, can you tell it again that how did you relate that physical system with the mathematical one, that rank one? Can you please tell it again?
I couldn't hear you completely. Can you please repeat your question?
Hello, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah,
Hello.
continue, please.
Yes, sir. You have related that mathematical formulation with the physical one, no? Sir. That will you repeat that
Yeah.
rank one? Yeah.
So in the case of the double pendulum, right?
Yes, sir.
Is that what you want to know? Yes. So in the case of the double pendulum, you know, what is the size of the state vector? It's a 4x1 vector. It is comprised of θ1, θ2, θ1 dot, θ2 dot. I'm making measurement only of θ2, okay, only of this particular thing. So my output of that vector will be equal to 0, 0, 1, 0 times θ1, θ2, θ1, 1 dot, θ2, oh sorry, θ1, θ1 dot. I think that was how I defined my state vector earlier. θ1, θ1 dot, θ2, θ2 dot. Okay, I'm measuring only θ2. So my C will look something like this. Okay, now I have my A matrix which I wrote down for the previous in the previous class, and I compute CA all the way to CAN minus 1, and I will get a 4x4 matrix gamma O, and I compute the rank of that matrix. I find out the number of independent rows in that matrix. Okay, I will discover that the number of independent rows is not equal to the size of the matrix. I don't have 4 independent rows. I have only maybe 3 or 2. I don't know. I have not done this math, but I will discover that it's not a full rank matrix. Okay. So what that tells me then is that some of the states are not observable. Okay. If I did not know that I was dealing with this physical system, if I had done coordinate transformation, etc., which garbled this information, and I had no insight about the physics of the problem, I can still use this gamma O and its rank to tell that there are some states which are not observable here. Okay, and that's done by computing C, CA, etc., etc. C is given here, A was given in the previous class. Okay.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Rajpal Singh has a question.
So if we have a scenario in which the minimal polynomial has a rank less than n, then the measurements we have taken, the derivatives up to n minus 1, even those won't be independent. Then how do we deal with such a situation in this framework?
So, I mean, this framework is intended to address the situation that you are talking about. This minimal polynomial is the one that you would obtain by cancelling off poles and zeros and so on, right? So the cancelling off of poles and zeros results in unobservability or uncontrollability of certain states. Okay. So a general system would have, let us say there is some parameter uncertainty and the numerator and denominator polynomials don't cancel one another. Okay. In that case, that original system may be observable and controllable. But under certain specific conditions, when the polynomials are such that some of the poles get cancelled with some of the zeros in the numerator and so on, then the minimal polynomial's degree will be less than the original system's degree. And that is a scenario in which the rank of the original system's observability or controllability matrix drops. Okay.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So now we are the last task of the day is to separate out the observable states from the unobservable states, and I will adopt the same recipe-based approach to do that. So what we do is we take a matrix TO to be comprised of two matrices, TO1. So this is, I take all the rows of this gamma O matrix. Let us say I have k rows of the gamma O matrix which are linearly independent, so which is less than n, let us say. Then I make a matrix TO1 by stacking each of these rows one on top of another. So the size of TO1 is therefore going to be equal to k by n. Okay. Then the remaining n minus k rows I fill up with any old thing, such that as long as they're independent of the rows of TO1. So that's TO2. This is not very different from TC1 and TC2. So TC2 also I filled up with some column vectors, no connection with the controllability matrix and so on. That's how I filled up TC2. Similarly, TO2 also I fill up as rows which are not which are linearly independent of the rows of TO1. That's all. And this will have a size of n minus k. There will be n minus k such rows, and I make this invertible matrix TO by picking n linearly independent rows, TO1 and TO2. Okay. So now I execute this transformation that x is equal to TO times x1. Okay, I think this is a little more sophisticated than the one that I had earlier. Sorry, there's one more step here. It is okay. I will just write out the step because I'm not able to follow the logic right now. I'll write out the step, and the proof will be in the notes. So then I take the inverse of this matrix, TO inverse. Let us say I get another vector, another matrix, S, which is the inverse of TO. And this is SO1, SO2, where SO1 is again this n by k matrix, and SO2 is n by n minus k matrix. Okay. Then the transformation x1 is equal to SO. This is SO. SO times x. Just as x1 was equal to TO times x in the previous case, here x1 is equal to SO times x. This transforms this equation. So I had x dot is equal to AX plus BU, y is equal to CX. If I apply this thing, I'll get x1 dot is equal to SO inverse times A times SO x1. I think there's something wrong here. Plus SO inverse. I think there's something wrong here. Okay, I will correct this. Maybe we will stop at this point. There's something wrong in my notes. This transformation that is necessary to separate out the observable and unobservable states, I think there is something wrong. I'm not able to intuitively understand what I have written in my notes here. So I shall, instead of writing something wrong, at length and then correcting it completely next class, we shall stop at this point. Okay, I shall discuss this entire thing in the next class. This please ignore. Okay, so we will stop here. I will confirm the transformation necessary correctly and then get back to you in the next class about this. So Rushikesh has a question.
Sir, from last lecture, when we write our observer equation, that x cap equals to ax cap.
Yes.
Plus bu, and then y cap equals to cx cap. Sir, when we say means we write the error dynamics for that x dot minus x cap dot.
Yes.
So sir, in that case means when that error goes to 0, we say that x approaches x cap. But sir, means here we are providing x cap to our computer, or how, means that I didn't understand.
So x cap is a variable that resides in the computer. Okay. So and in the computer, I'm implementing the differential equation. X cap dot is equal to A times x cap plus B times U plus LC times x minus x cap. I'm implementing that in the computer. Okay, that's all that I'm implementing. But what my analysis shows is that when I take the error between what my computer is computing and the actual dynamics of the system, x cap will asymptotically approach x. Okay, at the rate at which it approaches x, of course, is decided by the eigenvalues of A minus LC. So what is your question here?
Sir, my question is, means are we providing value of x cap as initial condition? Yes. Or what?
Correct. We choose some initial condition for x cap, okay, which may have no connection with the initial condition of our actual physical system. Okay, but we choose this particular dynamics for evaluation of that vector x cap, whatever I told you now. Then what happens is as a function of time, the error between x cap and x will reduce. Okay, and after some time, x cap will very nearly be the same as x, even though my initial condition for the x cap vector was very different from that of the plant, from that of the physical system I'm trying to control. Okay.
Okay. Means our x vector is assuming value of x cap with time as time
With
progresses.
Not x vector assumes a value of x cap. It's the other way around. X vector is the actual physical vector. Okay, our x cap vector will assume the value of x.
Okay.
So my model, my computer will start to read out values of x cap, which will be exceedingly close to the actual values of x of the physical system itself.
Okay.
Okay, any other question? Okay, so if there are no further questions, then I shall stop this lecture at this point. Thanks a lot. Bye. So I apologize once again. I don't have the correct expression for the separation of observable and unobservable states. I will get back to you about that in the next class. Thank you.